Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Trish Bunnett. On behalf somebody's mic is on. On behalf of the Globe and Mail events team, we'd like to welcome you to the Hate Crimes in Canada event. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, including Inuit Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I now have the privilege of introducing Elder Wabigoon. Elder Wabigoon is an Ojibwe elder who sits with the Loon clan, a keeper of sacred pipes, a member of Lac Seul First Nation, and a 60s scoop survivor. Wabigoon is a speaker, land defender, and water protector. She is the First Peoples Leadership Advisor to the Dean with the Faculty of Architecture, Landscape, Design, and Forestry at the University of Toronto. Recently, she curated the mural, Ambwe Magwada, with Q Rock at 1 Spadina Crescent. Elder Wabigoon shares her teachings with Indigenous youth in a summer program, Nikabi Dawadina Gigwag, a U of T access program she co-founded 4 years ago. Wabigoon continues to co-lead as the program's elder in the summer months. She is currently a faculty member with the Centre of Indigenous Theatre and often shares with other organizations across the city of Toronto. In her spare time, she loves to paint, read, and spend time with her husband, Carl, of 24 years. Please welcome Elder Wabigoon.
Thank you, Elder Wabigoon. That was very touching, thank you, and very meaningful. It's the first time we've been able to get people together like this for a long time. I'm the publisher of the Globe and Mail. My name is Philip Crawley, and I want to welcome you all here today. We've had to learn how to do virtual events in the last 2 years. The space was being very well used before COVID came along, and this is the first live Globe-branded event since 2020, since COVID started. So very nice to see everybody in the room today. Make the most of the view, looking this way or that way, because over the next few years it will start to disappear. This city is growing upwards at a tremendous pace. There's building going up all around you, and if you look east, even more. So this part of the city is changing rapidly. But certainly welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We've got lots more people joining us remotely from across Canada. I think something like 1,000 people participating virtually. Obviously, we're very pleased to have the opportunity to partner with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. It is a very important topic. If you've been reading the Globe and Mail for the last couple of days, you'll have seen front page coverage yesterday and today, a big centre spread yesterday morning on the stats, the data, the graphs, which tell the story of what's happening with hate crime and how it's being handled. We were pleased to see the announcement this morning of the RCMP task force. The foundation recently published results from a national survey which showed a majority of Canadians, 58%, regardless of age, gender, where they come from, believe that hateful and racist online content is a major problem in Canada. 72% say all major cities should have dedicated hate crime units within local police forces. Social media, online hate, policing are just a few of the topics coming up on today's program, which is a busy agenda today. The Globe and Mail has staff all over the country covering hate crimes at both local and national level. I'll mention in particular Thunder Bay, where we put a reporter back into Thunder Bay, not having had anyone there about 3 years ago, because we saw just the scale of the problems between the city, the police, and the Indigenous communities. And that story is still being told today. We've got a reporter called Willow Fiddler who's based in Thunder Bay, and she'll be moderating a panel that's coming up. So journalists who regularly cover this subject are in town today to moderate today's discussions. We've got Mike Hager joining us from our BC Bureau. It's our largest bureau outside of Toronto, and he will be taking part. Dakshana Bhaskaramurthy is here from Halifax, and Ian Bailey has come in from our Ottawa Bureau to also take part in today's event. And from our Toronto office, we have last year's Journalist of the Year for Canada, Tom Cardozo, on deck to moderate a discussion. His speciality is data journalism, and you will see more of that coming. So thank you for being here today. I'd like now to invite Mohammed Hashim, Executive Director of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, to say a few words. Thank you and welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see people in a room again. I want to begin by thanking Elder Rapagoon for your heartfelt words, and it was incredibly inspiring just to hear your voice. And your songs filled my heart, and it's good to start with the right intentions with those words. So thank you for that. Thank you, Philip, for having us in your space. And on behalf of our board of directors who are here from across this country and all of our staff that are over here, welcome to this Hate Crimes in Canada conference. Today is a bit of a launch of a journey for us, because when we look at the state of hate across Canada, it is clear that the problem is getting worse. Just this past weekend, I got a call from Imam Ibrahim Hindi from Dar al-Tawheed Mosque, who told me the attacker that had entered the mosque with an axe. This is a mosque that I go to. We don't know if it's hate motivated yet, because the police are still investigating that. But in all honesty, my heart stopped. This is a place that I know. I know every single carpet that's in that place. I've put my head down to pray there. Thank God no one was hurt. But honestly, it shook me, because it reminded me of what the worst case scenario could have looked like, which it did look like in Quebec City, 5 years ago. The morning after the massacre 5 years ago in Quebec, I flew out there to support the community. And, there's many stories that have impacted me, but one really haunts me. There was a girl who was 6 years old at the time, who was in the mosque running around the back. And when the gunman came in and opened fire, she saw her father being shot in the back. The man at the back jumped on top of her to save her. And when the gunman turned to her to shoot, he ran out of bullets. She didn't die that day. She survived. But that image of a girl in a mosque is one that still haunts me. I was reading yesterday in Newfoundland, there was another attack against a mosque. And they were saying that the parents were afraid to bring their kids back into the place of worship. In 2 weeks, Ramadan is going to be starting. People are excited to be back in a place, to see their community. Then all of a sudden, this happens. I know the community will bounce back. Maybe not everybody, but most within the community will return, because that is where their community belongs. But going to a mosque, a synagogue, a temple, a church should never feel like an act of courage. The anxiety of feeling unsafe is one that many are feeling these days. I was meeting with an organization in Calgary that serves Chinese seniors, and they told me that they had to change their complete service delivery model because people were afraid to leave their homes. They had to go into the homes to provide those services because people were too scared of all the violence that was happening towards Asian seniors. Whether it's a whether it's 6 women in Atlanta, or Michelle Go, or Christine Lee in New York, every time news of such violence is heard, many are left feeling completely unsafe. Every time an Indigenous woman disappears or is found dead, we think of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls who have been targeted in this country. Hate and racism continues to oppress First Nations, Métis, and Inuit of these lands. In 2020, over a quarter of hate crimes and 40% of those racially motivated were directed towards Black Canadians. These numbers don't tell the whole story. Consider that only a fifth of those who say they were victims of hate ever reported to police at all. It worries me to think what else is happening that we just don't hear about. The Jewish community has been dealing with hate for a long time. When there is violence, they hear condemnations. But sometimes there is only silence, and it is deafening. Like when the individual took people in a synagogue hostage in the US. There was mostly silence from our friends over here who we would have counted on to speak up. The pain and anxiety are heavy, and these days so many are scared and worried because of the rise of anti-Semitism. Communities are having to take safety in their own hands, and the Jewish community probably has the best synagogue security training system across this country because they've dealt with it for so long. I remember 4 years ago, Jeffrey Brown, who's the president of the Bayat Synagogue, came to Mississauga to do training for a mosque. But it shouldn't be up to volunteers. We all have a role to play. Yes, security funding helps. Yes, it's good to have more guards in places, to install cameras, but more can and should be done to tackle hate. There's no doubt that online spaces are incubating hate. Today you will hear how instead of Nazi symbols, which people can recognize as evil, haters use other symbols and audacious displays to inspire hate. When their followers see such symbols and nothing happens, they feel powerful, they feel inspired, because they go with impunity. Platforms, to be frank, are doing the bare minimum, and we need greater regulation to curtail such hate. We, as a people, need to send a message that the internet is for everyone. Just like if you're spreading hate on the town square, there will be consequences. There needs to be consequences for spreading hate online. We also know that there is much work to be done by law enforcement to tackle hate. A fraction of incidents are reported, and even a smaller fraction are charged or convicted. We know that going to the police to report a crime isn't easy, or even an option for many who have suffered police brutality. Canada's colonial past and present and police practices today have deeply damaged trust, both in the policing and the justice system. But if we're going to have a justice system that works effectively against hate, we all have to up our game. We need better legislation, we need better policing, we need better standards, we need better training, we need more accessible ways for people to report. We have a mountain to climb to come to a day when we can all believe that if we experience something hateful, that we could actually expect justice. Last year in August, I was invited to speak to the RCMP Commissioner's Chiefs of Police Roundtable to talk about hate crimes. In that, we all agree that so much more is needed to be done, so we decided to see how we can work together. And today, I'm pleased to announce we are launching a national intergovernmental task force to tackle hate crimes, co-chaired by myself and Alison Whelan, the Chief Strategy Officer of the RCMP. The task force will address issues around reporting, provide greater information of what is and what isn't a crime. We will build a national network of hate crimes investigators and look to create greater standards and better training. The task force will also examine potential changes to the criminal code and legislative reform. This intergovernmental task force will comprise of police jurisdictions from across Canada, including First Nations policing. There will be investigators, victim support experts, training development experts, researchers, Statistics Canada, and prosecutors involved. And as we launch this work, I want to welcome you all into this conversation. We recognize that we don't have all the solutions. Some of the best solutions that are coming to deal with hate come from grassroots organizations. And I want you to go deep today to hear those impacted, experts in the field, I also invite you to be in a relationship with us at the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. We want to hear not just from our speakers here today, but we want to hear from you. Because in order to tackle hate, all of us have a role to play, and all of us have to take responsibility. And with that, I'll invite Ian Bailey to take over and kick off today's conversation. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Mr. Ishim, and thank you, and hello, everyone. I'm Ian Bailey. I work at the Globe and Mail's Ottawa Bureau, and have covered hate crimes, particularly in a long period of time working the Globe's British Columbia Bureau with my colleague Mike Hager over there, who you'll be hearing from later on. Also the author of the Globe's Politics Briefing newsletter, which I would encourage you all to read and subscribe to, but that's another matter. So I'm happy to be here. We're going to have our first discussion. And as we go along, there may be a chance for you to add, there will be a chance for you to ask questions. There will be members of the organizing group moving around this space, and you can wave a hand and they'll come over and provide you with some paper to jot down questions. And if there's time, we'll get through to some discussion on some of the key points. So we're going to look at sort of the dynamics of hate. It's my pleasure to some of the numbers on hate as well. It's my pleasure to welcome to the virtual stage Lynn Barr-Telford, the Assistant Chief Statistician focused on social health and labor data with Statistics Canada. She's in Ottawa. We'll also have someone Mike and I know quite well, Dr. Barbara Perry, joining us. Barbara is the Director of the Centre on Hate, Bias and Extremism with Ontario Tech University. So we're very pleased to have both of them joining us today, and there they are on either side of the room. Let's start with Barbara. And Barbara, I wonder if you could sort of start by telling us, by the books and by the numbers, what is a hate crime?
Well, I guess it depends on whether you want an academic definition or a legal definition. As an academic, in the work that I do, I often use a sort of a political, much more politicized definition. So understanding hate crime as violence or a threat of violence that's intended to intimidate individuals and communities on the basis of their identities. So what that implies is an exercise of power, an attempt to silence, an attempt to contain and constrain particular communities. That's all well and good for an academic, but pragmatically, we need those legal definitions so that law enforcement has something to work with as well. So we define hate crime in a couple of different ways in that context. Typically, it refers to a criminal act which is motivated by hate or bias. So that's embedded in particular in our sentencing enhancement legislation and sort of implied in some of our hate propaganda legislation, which I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Lynn, from your perspective at Statistics Canada, what can you tell us about what the numbers say about the current frequency of hate crimes in Canada?
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everyone, for the chance to be here today. Last week, we actually released a fairly comprehensive analytical report on hate crime in Canada, focused primarily on police-reported hate crimes. And as Barb said, that entails police-reported hate crimes are those that are defined as criminal violations, whether it's against a person or property, whether or not there's an accused, that are motivated by hate. I'll share a few of those highlights from that report, Ian, but before I do, I think it's really, really important to say that police-reported crime is only one measure of hate that we have. We know that only about 1 in 5, 22% of crimes that are reported, self-reported, actually come to the attention and are reported to police. And we also know that reporting can be impacted by a number of different things, a tendency or not to report, as well as police practices. So with that, as some caveated remarks, what we've seen over the course of the last several years is an increasing trend in police-reported hate crime in this country. We saw a sharp increase in 2017, mostly due to an increase in crimes targeting a person's religion. And then in our most recent data, 2020, we've seen again a significant increase in police-reported hate crime, an increase of about 37%. And it's really important to acknowledge that this is against a backdrop where crime in general, the crime rate and the crime severity index were actually going down in 2020. So we've seen that increase and that significant increase in 2020, but we saw it was primarily due to an increase in crimes targeting race or ethnicity. They almost doubled in 2020, and now in this year made up almost 2/3, 62% of all hate crimes reported in 2020 were targeted against race or ethnicity.
Crime rate is going down, but hate crimes are going up. What are some of the factors, Barbara, that are driving, the societal factors that would be driving hate crimes up in 2022, 2021, and so on?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's important to put it in context. And I think that there are a number, sort of a constellation of factors that are coming together. If we look at, who the targeted communities are in terms of that increase, we see increases in anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, and anti-Asian violence. So I think, I think all of us expected to see this increase in anti-Asian violence. We've been very much aware over the last 2 years the dramatic incidents that have been targeting the Chinese community in particular, but other parts of the Asian community, East Asian community, in the context of COVID, and sort of scapegoating Asian communities for that crisis that we're facing. So in addition to that, of course, we are seeing, I think, some backlash violence within the context of anti-Black and anti-Indigenous violence. So reactions against BLM activism in Canada and the US. And I would say the same around anti-Indigenous violence, that again, that is a reaction against the activism of that community. So, we're seeing, as I referred to earlier on, right, we're seeing hate crime in those contexts as an attempt to sort of silence communities that have stepped outside of those allowable boundaries. So I think that that's really important to keep in mind. I think in a much broader way, we need to be aware of some of the online narratives coming from the mainstream, but also from politicians and from the extreme, that are legitimating and lending what we call permission to hate, and creating an environment in which it is okay to express, those negative sentiments in criminal ways.
Lynn, what can you tell us about where the data to measure hate crimes comes from, the data that you work with and your team works with as statisticians?
Well, Ian, there's a couple of ways in which we gather information around hate crime in this country. Two, in fact. The first is reliance on data reported by police, so police-reported hate crime. But the second is also self-reported hate crime. So in the first instance, our Canadian Centre for Justice and Community Safety Statistics at StatsCan is responsible for collecting the entirety of criminal incidents that come to us via police-reported records, and that includes all hate-motivated crimes as investigated by police and as determined by police. So this is whether it is a confirmed hate crime or a suspected hate crime that is reported. And when we get those police-reported data, we get information about the nature of the incident, about accused, victims, the motivations for the incidents, and a whole lot of context around it. And in fact, Ian, in terms of police-reported hate crime, that makes Canada among the world leaders in this sphere. But as we've said, that's not the only source of information that we collect around hate crime. And it is another very important source of information is collected directly from Canadians. So we ask Canadians about their experiences with 8 different types of criminal incidents, ranging from physical assault and sexual assault, for example, to vandalism and theft and break and enter and so forth. And we ask Canadians whether or not they perceive these crimes were to have been motivated by hate, and if so, for what reason. And we do rely on both these sources of information. They're complementary. In the one case, we get what's coming into the official justice system through the gateway of policing. And in the other, we get a sense of what the experiences are with hate among Canadians in the community. As we know, and as it was mentioned in some of the opening remarks, not all crime comes to the attention of police, and there are a number of reasons for why some criminal incidents are not reported. In some cases, it may be a lack of confidence. In some cases, it may be a belief that the incident itself will not be necessarily acted upon, or it may be a belief by some that the incident was not important enough to have been reported. So a number of different factors. The third source of information that we gather is related to hate crime, and that's information about experiences with discrimination writ large. And so recently we've been doing a lot of work in that area to get a sense of the way Canadians have experienced discrimination or systematic biases in this country. So multiple sources, really important to having that complete picture of what's happening in this country with respect to hate.
And staying with you for a moment, what's the consequence of underreporting or non-reporting of hate crimes in terms of creating a picture of this problem?
What's really important is to understand that there is no one source that will to hate. So we really do need to look at the complementary sources. So Ian, we know from what Canadians tell us when we ask them about their experiences with crime and those that they perceive to have been motivated by hate, that about 22% are reported to police. So that leaves a large number of criminal incidents that are not necessarily coming into the system. So what does that mean with respect to police reported data? First of all, they're very, very reliable source of information. They're collected after investigation. They're collected according to standards and agreed upon definitions, but they're not the fulsome, complete picture. And we know they're an underestimate of what's happening with respect to hate crime in the country.
Barbara, what are some of your views on some of the issues impacting the underreporting of hate crimes?
So Ian, there are a number of different reasons for why Canadians tell us that they don't report to policing. Back in some of our previous research, we actually asked Canadians for their reasons, and they're generally speaking, we've seen some differences when it comes to reporting or not of crime in general versus specific related to hate crime. For example, we found that the Canadians were more likely to say that they didn't think that reporting to police would be effective with respect to hate crime than they were for other crimes that were not reported. We also saw a difference in the perception of fear of the court process, or not necessarily wanting to get engaged in the court process. So that's a really important aspect. And we've also recently seen some stark differences when it comes to confidence in the justice system and confidence in policing by different groups. So these are all important factors when it comes to reporting.
Barbara, what misperceptions do members of the public have about hate crimes in your view?
Well, I think on the one hand, I think there's a general lack of awareness of the extent, and I think the impacts of hate crime as well. I mean, we tend to think about it as something that, like other crimes, it affects the individual victim. But of course, one of the things that I've been studying quite extensively are the community impacts associated with hate crime. So I think that that's something that we could maybe share and highlight and amplify a little bit more. I think pragmatically, I think there's a lack of understanding even about what hate crime is, what constitutes hate crime. So we often hear when there's something that looks as if it's probably motivated by hate or bias, a call for, police to lay hate crime charges. And I think that's probably the key misunderstanding, is that there's no concrete piece of legislation that refers to a hate crime. So there are no such charges to be laid. As I mentioned earlier on, we have hate crime sentencing legislation, which means that there is, say, an arson. It's only at sentencing then that the bias motivation might come into play as an aggravating factor, which will allow for the amplification of the sentence. And then we have, there is one other, which is mischief to religious property, which is, again, when it's targeting the sorts of violence that we've seen quite frequently, property crimes, targeting mosques or synagogues or other places of worship. And then the other cluster that we have are essentially what might be referred to as hate propaganda legislation, which is incitement to hatred, incitement to genocide, those sorts of pieces. But I think there's not a very solid understanding of what especially the propaganda offenses, what that means, what the standard is, what the bar is. And the bar is very high for those sorts of offenses to go forward, for the Crown to take them forward, and unusually for the Attorney General's office to grant permission for charges to be laid there. So I think that, if there's one piece that we really want to amplify and explain for the general public, it's maybe exactly that, what the legislation is.
Lynn, do you think that there's anything that could be done to improve the management of hate crimes data in Canada?
I think there are three things that I would draw upon by way of improvements. The first we're actually working on, and that's a better understanding of the accused and the victims with respect to hate crimes. Right now, in our data, we're not able to identify either the racialized or Indigenous identity of victims and accused of hate crimes. That's a significant gap in the data that we're working really closely with the policing community, but also with community organizations and stakeholders across the country to try and fill that gap. I think it's important to understand the nature of the victim and accused in this context. I also, as we spoke about, and as Barb has talked about, there's a lot of work to do around understanding hate incidents vis-a-vis hate crimes. And I think there's a lot of work in that sphere to come up with some standardized definitions of hate incidents, to have, as Barb said, a complete understanding of what differentiates the two, so we can have a better picture of what's happening. And thirdly, we really need to tackle reporting. And I've spoken about that, and others have spoken about that, but really getting an understanding of what the reasons are for not reporting, what the dynamics are in that regard, and the various actions that can be undertaken, whether they're at the community level, amongst policing, amongst researchers, and so forth, to improve reporting of hate crime and also of hate-related incidents. So we do have some work to do to fill some data gaps and to move the yardstick in our understanding.
And a question to both of you. Given your expertise on the data, I was wondering if you had any views, any advice you would provide to those who have been victimized by hate crimes. Barbara, why don't you go first?
Did you say me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I would encourage people to continue to report or to begin to report, as the case may be. One of the things that I've heard from people in some of the work that I've done with targeted communities and affected communities is that they might recognize that maybe nothing will happen, that maybe it won't be taken seriously, whatever the fear is, but they still recognize the importance of reporting. I think Lynn, you talked earlier about the gaps and filling in those gaps, and that's an important piece. Is in order to understand fully the trends, where the clusters are, where the concentration of hate crime is, those sorts of pieces. We do need to have more fulsome reporting from targeted communities. So I think that regardless of what your expectations are, in order to begin to really unpack the trends and to document the problem, continue to report. I've even worked with some police services who say, it's vitally important that you report not just, criminal incidents, but criminal events, but hate incidents as well, those that don't rise to the level of criminal behavior, because they also help us to identify trends and to, to watch for warning signs that something might be escalating. So absolutely, you need to, I think, collectively and individually, think very seriously about reporting any sort of incidents that are targeting you or targeting the community as a whole.
Lynn, do you have any thoughts on this?
I would agree that reporting is fundamentally important to our understanding and to really leveraging our capacity to act as a society. It requires data, it requires a strong understanding, and it requires evidence. And I think we all acknowledge that the impacts of hate crime are felt beyond even the individual experiencing it. They have a wider impact on the community, and that understanding of those impacts and the various contexts within which hate incidents or hate crimes are unfolding is important for those who are putting in place actions to address solutions and also to support victims.
All right, we have some time left for questions. If there are any questions from the floor, has anyone written down anything they'd like to raise with our speakers? And we have 5 minutes left. Is there anything? I'm looking around the room. Members of the team are making their way around.
Well, we're waiting for that. If I can just add one.
Of course.
Lynn was talking about, what can we do to enhance our data. I think the other piece is training within law enforcement. There's very limited training available for law enforcement officers across the country. The Ontario Police College has a wonderful week-long session that they do. Has been twice a year. I think they're trying to increase that to 3 times a year. It still is not enough to provide training, because that's really for the more advanced officers who are really working in the hate crime space. But I think officers who are the first responders also need to enhance their understanding and awareness of hate crimes so that they can identify it, they can acknowledge it, and they can investigate it more effectively when they are confronted with it.
So in the last moments of this first panel, we have questions for each of our 2 guests. And I guess I'll go alphabetically to Ms. Bartelford. Lynn, you first. There's a question from a member of the audience. Is the victimization portion of the General Social Survey going to be repeated annually? Can it be expanded upon? And if you might explain to us about this survey, the social survey, that might be helpful. You've got about 2 minutes.
Okay, a quick primer on the General Social Survey. It's conducted every 5 years, and essentially it asks Canadians about their experiences with 8 different crime types and asks them about motivations and circumstances, including whether or not the incidents were motivated by hate. So the frequency of this survey, as the question entails, it is a once every 5 years. Our police reported crime data is reported annually, so it's more frequent. And I think it is important to acknowledge and to have that dialogue on whether or not once every 5 years is in fact frequent enough to have an understanding of the experiences. We do supplement with work around discrimination and various other instruments that we use, but the actual victimization survey is an every 5 year.
Okay. And Dr. Perry, last question to you from a member of the audience. What are the roots of hate crimes? What drives the offending behavior?
Oh my gosh, the easy question. Yeah, well, I think we need to look at it on multiple levels. I mean, sometimes there are individual drivers that, someone has, they've been raised with, stereotypes and prejudices against particular groups. But I'm a sociologist, so I sort of like to think about it in the broader context, the extent to which we as a culture, other people. So important to recognize the role that settler colonialism has played in shaping not just the way that we think about and respond to Indigenous communities, but other, especially racialized communities. I think we need to look at, homophobia and transphobia, for example, and the extent to which that's been rooted in, key religious institutions, in medicine, in mental health issues as well. So I think we really do need to look for the roots of hate crime and hate in other forms of othering and distancing that also then shape the interpersonal relationships that we have with individuals and communities.
Well, I think we're ending just on time. We'd like to thank Lynn and Barbara for their participation today and their answers in helping to launch this discussion that's going to go through the afternoon. I'm going to hand off this table and this podium to Willa Fiddler, who's going to moderate the next discussion. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Ian, and hello, everyone. I'm Willow Fiddler, a reporter with the Globe and Mail based in Thunder Bay. Quite excited to be here because, well, for this event, but also because this is the first time I've been to the Globe and Mail office since being hired in May of 2020. So I'm getting to meet some of my coworkers for the very first time in person, which is fantastic. But a lot of my coverage relates to hate crimes and racism, so I'm happy to be a part of the conversation and to moderate our next panel that I will introduce shortly. So in this discussion, we will focus on how police departments are responding to hate crimes and ideas to improve upon some of the approaches. So first we have Mustafa Farouk, CEO of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. Welcome, Mustafa. We also have Kieran Bisla, who is a detective with the Hate Crimes Unit at Toronto Police Services. Welcome, Kieran. Joining us remotely from Ottawa is Ali Togrol, acting sergeant with the Hate and Bias Crime Unit with the Ottawa Police Service. Hi, Ali. Sorry if I pronounced that correctly. And last but not least, also joining us virtually is Anthony Statham, a corporal with the British Columbia Hate Crimes Team with the RCMP. Welcome, Anthony.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for everyone for joining us today. I'm going to sit over here with the panelists. So we're just going to jump in right with some questions. I'd like to start by asking about what you are all noticing in your various jurisdictions related to hate crimes, especially through the pandemic. Kieran, can we start with you?
Sure, not a problem. First of all, I'd like to thank Globe and Mail and CRF for putting this together. Yes, in terms of trends that we've observed during the pandemic, it's very similar and consistent with what's being reported by Statistics Canada, in that there was an increase in anti-Asian hate crimes. In 2020, we also saw an increase in anti-Black hate crimes. And while we can't say for sure that international events and things that happen or transpire across the border or south of the border have a link, we know that that international events can have an impact here in Toronto, and this is clearly observed in the statistics that were collected in 2020. There's also been a rise in online hate, and I think that is part and attributed to the pandemic, that more people are at home, that they're on their computers, they're accessing websites where the information is not accurate. There's a lot of misinformation, false information, and individuals aren't necessarily confirming whether that information is accurate. So those are just some of the trends that we've observed.
Thank you. Anthony, what are you noticing?
Thanks, Will. I just wanted to acknowledge first I'm speaking today with traditional territories, Coast Salish peoples. Sort of to what Kieran said, the very similar here in BC, especially during the first wave of the pandemic. What we saw in BC was a significant increase in hate crimes and incidents targeting East Asian victims in particular. And that was the case from about March to July of 2020. Speaking, to the overall numbers, what we've seen is a year-over-year increase, from 2017 to 2021, and I expect we'll see an increase in numbers for 2022 as well. I think that probably certainly has to do with the rise in overall hate crimes and incidents, combined with better public awareness. That's certainly the case that we've seen here in British Columbia with some of the initiatives undertaken, especially by the provincial government. And in addition to better understanding by the police departments here about how to properly record and investigate hate crimes.
Thank you. Mustafa, you aren't with the police service, but you speak for the Muslim community in Canada. What have you observed related to hate and hate crimes lately?
Sure, so just to be really clear, I don't think I speak for every Muslim in Canada, but certainly for the National Council of Canadian Muslims. And by the way, first I would like to thank as well the CRRF, and specifically my friend Mohammed Hashim and Amira for helping to pull this together. And I see so many great friends in this room as well. It's a pleasure to see you all as well. And thanks as well to the Globe and Mail for bringing together the space. Look, I'll just be honest. I'm sick and tired of going to funerals. And it's enough. We just cannot continue to do this merry-go-round. 25-minute drive from here or so is the IMO Mosque in Etobicoke. On September 12, 2020, I was there on the ground when, 20 minutes after somebody who had become a friend over 2020, Muhammad Aslam Zavis, I was there to find him and his lying there after a man connected to a white supremacist group walked up, took out a knife and slit his throat. Enough is enough. We've seen these attacks targeting not just the Muslim community, but the Jewish community, Black communities, so many other diverse communities, Indigenous communities. And let's be clear, hate crime units, our police services are not serving us right, period. And it is what it is. It's a hard truth to confront. That's not to say anything about my colleagues here, specifically people like Ali Togrel, Anthony Statham. These are the people that you call in the middle of the night when something goes wrong, and all of these folks, with the Toronto Police Service, people like Superintendent Ron Tavener, always there when you need to give them a call. But that's not what I'm speaking about. I'm speaking about the institutions and how fundamentally broken they are in response.
We're going to get back to some of what you said in a little bit. Ali, a related question to the previous one. Can you tell us about your team's experience during the Ottawa truck convoy and the related hate crime incidents there?
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. We did see, unfortunately, an uptick in incidents during the convoy, specifically directed towards women and our racialized members of our community. And they were very much targeted for wearing masks. Here we had a group of people who are in Ottawa protesting for their freedoms of not wearing a mask. At the same time, they're targeting people who are wearing masks, which led to racial slurs, acts of xenophobia, displaying of Nazi flags, the Confederate flags, people who are not aware of exactly about history or not wearing the yellow Star of David, comparing themselves to the Jews who suffered through World War II because of various mask mandates or vaccine mandates. So sadly, that's what we dealt with for about 21 days during the convoy.
Mustafa, let's go back to you, back to what you said about it being an institutional problem and the police response to hate crimes. What do victims of hate crimes experience when they call the police, and can you provide a couple of examples to share?
Well, I mean, I think it's clear that obviously each jurisdiction has its own way of responding. But I think just here in the room with the police agencies that are here, we have very clear problems with the way that people engage with these particular police agencies. So let's talk about Ottawa Police Services. And again, love Ali, love all the people, the people who are on this panel. But Ottawa Police Services had a very public debacle about whether they even had a hate crimes unit. Internally, they were fighting about whether the hate crimes unit actually existed. And I think if that doesn't tell you about the problems that exist with the ways that hate crimes are being dealt with, I don't know what does. If we look at the BC RCMP, the BC Human Rights Commissioner released a scathing report finding that, amongst other things in their study of police agencies in British Columbia, you were 11 times more likely to be arrested if you're Indigenous. How do you square that with the fact that as well, with the RCMP in British Columbia led to the Nuttall sting, which was the entrapment of 2 Muslims with mental health issues in a massive terrorism scandal that the BC Court of Appeal found to be a massive travesty of justice. How do we expect people to report hate crimes to the police agencies that have the authority, as they feel, to kill a minority? How does that work? And I think in Toronto, we've seen time after time and again, folks from various communities, we will not forget about people like DeFonte Miller and the experiences that they've had when making calls and experiencing things. And I think we just cannot disconnect the reality. Just to give a very simple example, I'm sure you all were following what happened in Mississauga over the weekend. When I went to the Peel Mosque where it happened, we had police officers come in who were part of the Hate Crimes Diversity Equity Unit, wearing the thin blue line, the very common insignia symbolizing that police agencies are separated by a very thin veneer between the masses of darkness out there. And I think if that doesn't tell you how broken our hate crime units are in responding, how do you feel that victims feel when they call police? And I could talk ad nauseum about that, but I think I'll pass it over back.
I'm going to stay with you just for a minute. How would you, before moving on, I'd like to hear from the other units. How would you like to see the police response improve?
I think it's about a system reform. In Edmonton, we had a person who had been followed home and been beaten because she was a Black Muslim wearing hijab. When she called the police to report her incident and she was connected to the hate crimes unit, they laughed at her when she was describing. So, how do you fix that? I don't know. And so when we talk about, we need to report, guess what? People want to report. They try to report, and they come up against massive barriers. And so I think it's a lot more, I'm sick and tired of hearing police agencies tell us to encourage more reporting. We have been encouraging till we're blue in the face, but the reality is that there simply needs to be a system reform from top to bottom.
Karen, what are your ideas on how police response can improve?
Well, first off, I'd like to say that hate crimes is a priority for the Toronto Police Service. We are committed to building public trust, public confidence, and we understand that there are a number of reasons why people may not report, and we continuously, as part of our mandate, look to encourage reporting and talk about hate crimes, what is a hate incident, and we talk about the police response and what they can, what the community can expect. But we don't just provide education, we also have the discussion. We listen to stories of reasons why people may not want to report because they're uncertain of the justice system response. And we talk about the types of questions that individuals can expect. And we listen to how we can do better because it's not a perfect system and we're committed. We want to do better. And part of having those conversations is speaking to the community and saying, well, what is it that we can do? And I think in my experience, oftentimes we hear is the community not understanding sometimes the difference between what is a hate crime, why those criminal cases don't go before the courts. And when they do go before the courts, some of the challenges that may come with it. And what I can say is when we do have criminal investigations, they don't just stop at the investigative piece. These are conversations that are had with the Ministry of the Attorney General's office. Information gathering, evidence collection continues from the initial point of when a police officer first responds to a call all the way to the court process. So gathering that information and determining that motivation piece can be extremely challenging. Toronto Police Service has a procedure. It requires the supervisor to attend, to be notified, to ensure that these types of crimes don't get missed. We have a process in which these calls are filtered and that the frontline officers contact the CIB, the Divisional Detective Sergeants, as well as our unit. And what I can say is that the Toronto Police is committed, our hate crime unit is very committed in ensuring that these occurrences don't get missed.
Thank you. Anthony, what are your goals or ideas on ways police response can improve?
Thanks, Willow. So, I'd echo everything that Kieran said. In terms of, likewise, the commitment of the RCMP, certainly here in British Columbia, to be more effective in terms of investigating hate crimes and addressing them and addressing hate incidents and finding recourses for victims and supporting victims. To what the police can do from a big picture or system standpoint. I understand that we at the RCMP understand too that, talking about encouraging reporting, in as much as I've seen, absolute value to that and had success with it, doesn't square well for victimized communities who are continuing to experience, hate racism and then in certain instances, very tragic violence. So, from, speaking, to the extent that I can from the RCMP's perspective, I think that, we internally have a responsibility to raise the profile of hate crime investigations within our organization. In British Columbia, we have the provincial contract, and sort of due to our size, due to our numbers in the province, that is really the reason that the hate crime team here exists here. But every police service in the country would tell you that they're run off their feet. Every unit, for that matter, would tell you that they have more on their plate than they can handle. So in a sense, it's very easy to say, we need more resources, but that is a part of it. We certainly, beyond, prioritizing hate crime investigations within our organization, to say, hey, from a standpoint of client services, we certainly need to, emphasize and see through outcomes to hate crimes investigations better than we do. We need more resourcing. We need more, and our partnerships with governments are very, very important in that regard. We need that support, and ultimately we need that funding to deploy resources more effectively and to a standard that's expected by Canadians.
Thank you. And finally, Ali, thoughts on how police response can improve?
Well, pretty much the same lines as Anthony and Kieran, but I also want to thank Mustafa for his comments, because I have to agree with him on multiple points. The mere fact of us constantly asking people to report crimes, it isn't enough. And we knew that in Ottawa. When we relaunched the unit 2 years ago, we knew that there was a lot of work ahead of us. We knew we had to build some trust within the community. We knew that there was this lack of trust. The same groups that are victimized in terms of Stats Canada's numbers when they come out, these are also the same groups of people who have very little trust in policing. So we knew that that barrier existed. We partnered up with United Way. We have an anti-racism campaign that we're going to launch, which is going to target youth similar to the anti-bullying campaign. Because the education part is very important. The younger we start, I think the more effective it's going to be. But this idea, we need to do better from our end, educating our members internally what hate crimes and what hate incidences are. We have to do the same thing out in the public so that people understand what the laws are in Canada in terms of hate crimes, free speech. And again, most importantly is we need to build those relationships that have suffered over the past 10 plus years within our racialized communities to be able to better serve them, to be able to gain their trust. And we have to also show that through our investigations. I mean, I think we've done a little bit of that here in the last 3 years. We've constantly have had an increase in the number of reports that we've had. And I believe some of that has to do with the fact that the public in Ottawa does see that we are taking this very seriously, and there's a dedicated unit that will investigate such incidents.
Thank you. Kieran, we're going to go back to you. Hate crime investigations are typically complex. Without going too deep into legislation, what are the main factors that police have to be mindful of when investigating potential hate crimes?
So the law addresses hate in a number of ways. There's the hate propaganda provisions that I believe Dr. Perry touched on a little bit. There's mischief to religious property, educational institutions, and then there's 718.2, which is the sentencing principle. And the vast majority of the occurrences that we see that I believe most police services receive reports on are 718.2 related offenses, in which there's a criminal offense, and that could be any criminal code offense that's listed, and then the police look for bias, prejudice, or hate. And determining motivation, again, can be a real challenge. And some of the criteria that we train officers and speak to the community about is looking at key pieces such as, utterances that are made, the date and time that the event took place. Was it, following a protest? Was it during a demonstration? Where in the city were you specifically located? Is there some significance to that particular area? As well as sometimes we will receive reports where members of the community just simply want the incident documented, and we can look at it for patterns of similar occurrences. So some of the those are just some of the pieces that our officers look at, but it's not always apparent. So an officer can respond to an assault call, and unless the victim or maybe the witnesses talk about some of the criteria that I've spoken about, those may get missed. So it's really important for police to ensure that they are taking into consideration the criteria I just mentioned, and also for victims to provide that evidence. And it's difficult because it can be humiliating. They may want to share that information with their friends and not so much with the police because they don't want to repeat those particular statements. There's a certain stigma as well, and it can be very difficult and hard, and that's what we've heard from the community. So again, these cases are very complex, but when we do have these cases, we ensure that officers are asking the right questions, and we are also liaising with the Ministry of the Attorney General's Hate Crime Working Group to make sure that everything that we need to consider is included in our cases. Yes, that's my...
Thank you. Mustafa, I'll ask you, and I hear your frustrations about the reporting and underreporting. How do you feel we can address the issues of underreporting of hate crimes?
Well, I think, first of all, let's be clear. More resourcing is not the answer. Absolutely not. Throwing more money at a broken institution without fixing the underlying problems isn't going to work. And I think we need to be mindful and cognizant of that. I think in terms of dealing with the challenge of underreporting, I think we just need to look very clearly and identify the challenge, which is that our policing agencies are broken. It's very easy to orientalize and to assume that minority communities are somehow just inherently afraid of police or don't want to report just because they have some connections back home. And certainly I'm sure that plays into a factor. But I can tell you time and time again, we've sat with victims and called police and tried to get them to lay a charge or to investigate. And it has been the uphill battle of the century on so many files. I mean, I remember a case, and I'm sure many of you could just Google this while you're sitting, where a group called the Wolves of Odin walked into Canada's oldest mosque. This is a group that was there to trespass, that was there to intimidate worshipers. Not a charge filed, nothing. And I think when we see things like that, where this is not just a matter of not reporting, this is on national news, and you're not having any response from police in relation to that, I think that takes you to the core of the problem. And we have to be willing to name the problem and then to address that through fundamental reform.
Thank you. Ali or Anthony, any thoughts to share on that?
I think, again, customer service, I think, is key. At the end of the day, we have to make reporting of hate crimes easier. We've done that. We introduced online reporting because we know that, again, what Ms. Kieran was saying, there's this stigma of specific within the racialized communities. Not all the times do they want to have that face-to-face interaction with the police, nor do they want a cruiser going in front of their door, because again, it creates this image within the community, or there it is, there's that the family, again, the police at their home. So we took all that into consideration. We created the online reporting. We are working with our community partners to also introduce third-party reporting because, as mentioned, people do feel more comfortable at times going to social service agencies where they have some sort of a connection with. And we're partnering with them, and we're hoping very soon to be able to have that opportunity for someone to go to a social service agency and discuss whatever's happened to them, have that person report the incident to us. And again, going back to what Mustafa says, at the end of the day, if the public doesn't see the police, the Ottawa police, respond to these issues in a timely manner and to be able to investigate them fully, then what's the point of just constantly encouraging people to file reports if they don't see some sort of result or some sort of an action from our end? So I think that's all needs to be something that we need to focus on.
Thank you. Anthony? Anthony, was there anything you wanted to share with that?
And just to add, and just to address what Mustafa was saying, and loud and clear on and quite accurate on his assessment of the BC Court of Appeals decision in R versus Nuttall. The incident that he was speaking to in Edmonton, I'm aware of the incident, not aware of what investigation or lack of investigation occurred. I think that, and I'm just saying this from where I'm sitting. I've been in this job for 5 years. If there are frustrations with the police as institutions of sort of not understanding the scope of hate crime, or not appreciating how much victimization occurs to historically marginalized communities, in as much as the expectation is correct that the police should have a good awareness of that and always know what they're doing, I would say that perhaps in the past, a lack of understanding or appreciation for, sort of what hate crime is or the scope of it, in day-to-day life in Canada is relative to the general awareness in the Canadian public. And what I mean by that is that, really taking this event itself as an example, there's been so much of an increase in discourse around hate crimes in Canada in the public domain. I've participated in so many more of these over the past couple of years, and we're talking about an awful subject matter. The positive thing being is in the sense that there's a lot more awareness about it. The government of Canada too, greater understanding around hate, racism, and then implications for national security as well, is reflected in the fact that they've, in the past couple of years, have listed 9, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, xenophobic, racist entities as terrorist organizations in this country. And it's kind of mind-boggling to think that that didn't exist until 2 years ago. But what that's done is given the police additional tools to investigate groups like that, and again, have a different range of recourses available to investigate anything to do with hate, racism, and white supremacy in this country.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left. I believe there's some questions from the audience, if someone can grab them. I'm going to ask Kieran if she can just explain briefly the role of hate crime teams or units in police services, how they are set up and what they do.
So that'll vary from police service to police service. I can only speak to the Toronto Police Service Hate Crime Unit. And our unit was established in 1993, and over the years it's changed. In 2020, our chief expanded the unit in response to the 51% increase in hate crimes in that year. And part of our mandate is reviewing all hate-related occurrences, which are criminal offenses motivated by hate, as well as hate incidents. And we review them, we classify them, and that classification is based on evidence that's there at the time. That's included in the report. We're a support unit, so we will follow up with the divisions to ensure that the occurrence is accurately classified and to determine whether there is additional evidence that may be required, and to also ensure that there is a community reassurance piece and that there's victim services followed up in the appropriate cases. The trends that we're looking at are very similar, again, to what Stats Canada has reported, in that the majority of our occurrences are mischief-related occurrences, and the other 45 or so are more violent. They're the uttering threats, the criminal harassments, and the assaults. And the community groups that are most victimized, that trend's been relatively the same since 1998, since we first started publishing the data on our site, which is the Jewish community, the LGBTQ2S community, the Black community, the Muslim community. And we look at ways on addressing hate and combating hate. We work with our communities, we work with units within within the police service, our community partnerships unit, and to look at a collaborative approach in addressing these types of crimes. Again, our mandate also includes providing education to our communities, as well as to police services, and consulting with the Ministry of Attorney Generals in cases that are appropriate.
Thank you. Okay, do we have a question ready?
So we have one from our virtual audience, and it's, what can police services do to properly train their officers to deal with hate crimes?
Any volunteers to answer that? Kieran, Ali?
Ben, what we did 3 years ago was to make sure that everybody in our organization who has the ability or is in a place to take a report from a member of our public, so that's from our call takers all the way down to our patrol officers, all went through a hate crimes training program, so that they're better able to understand what the legislation is, what actual hate crime section 318, 319 are, and also what Kieran mentioned, which is 99.9% of our file are criminal offenses that have hate or biases as motivation. how to properly code them, and how to properly take those reports. And we've continued to do that with each recruit class that comes in. And on top of that, what we've done is we've also done that same training for our community partners so that we can make sure that we're all on the same page. And it also includes university security officers, our transit officers. So anybody in a position of authority in our city that can make an arrest or is in a position to take the report has been getting this training.
Thank you. We have about a minute or so left. Does anyone want to jump in with an answer? Anthony, do you want anything to add to that?
Sure. I think from a question about training, it's one that often comes up, and I think it goes back to sort of what I was saying before about within police agencies to raise the profile and the urgency around hate crimes, and that includes training. Recruits to the RCMP get some training, at Depot Division. There is supplementary training available outside of that in the form of online training. But I think that given the expectations in the public today around investigating hate crimes, there needs to be more investment around training. What that looks like, is a matter of investment of time and energy and also funding to make sure that happens for every agency.
Thank you. We have to leave it there. Thank you to Mustafa, Kieran, Ali, and Anthony for joining us today. We're going to take a brief break now, and I think we're going to resume at 2:40. I'm not sure if that's still on time or not, but we'll be back after the break. Thank you.